Welcome to another session of The Truth as We Know It. My name is Michael Price. I'm here in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'll be joined today by Steve Smith and Dustin Price as we review the results of a survey that we posted this week to a group of friends who will comment on news and other items of interest that have struck them this week. We asked these selected individuals two questions. The first, what topic or news item caught your attention the most this week? What we want to know is, no matter what their source of information, what story stuck in their mind? What was significant to them? The second question we asked was, what subject has occupied your thoughts the most this week? Now, this could be something personal or social or political, but what's on your mind? And our hope is by discovering what's on the mind of other individuals and sharing what's on our mind with them, that we can promote a better understanding of how people are digesting the news and how they're reflecting on the news. Here are some of the responses to our first question this week. COVID positive athletes and staff at the Olympics and the firing of the musical director 48 hours before the opening ceremony. COVID and the need to remask here in Alabama. Rand Paul being extremely rude to Tony Fauci during a hearing. Climate change causes such extreme high temperatures out west that some road surfaces melt. COVID-19 and the Delta variant. World population growth. Climate change causing devastating flooding in China and Europe, and also related to climate change, a move by Democrats to include carbon caps in upcoming legislation. Disappointed that our local government decided not to address or support national measures to address climate change. Spike in COVID cases in Provincetown, Massachusetts, where the vaccination rate is the highest in the state. The data points to tourist influx on July 4th. Increase in COVID infections because of the Delta variant and refusal of or resistance to vaccination. The Provincetown surge in COVID cases. What's caught my attention most this week is the resistance to the vaccine and the resurgence of COVID. And he wrote a haiku about it. Thanks for your service, fighting against the vaccine, etched on your gravestone. Answers to our second question, what subject has occupied your thoughts the most this week, included COVID-19, the Delta variant and unvaccinated people, current transition into retirement, extreme selfishness of people who won't get the COVID vaccine. They're putting us all at risk. Interdependence of family members, friends, community, national population, and global population. Taking care of family members after the death of my daughter-in-law's father. COVID-19 and the possible need for everyone to mask up again as the Delta variant spreads. COVID-19 and breakthrough infections like the one that caused a friend of ours to be sick in bed for 4 days. COVID-19. Climate change is probably irreversible in my lifetime. Thinking about those who cast doubt on the efficacy of vaccine for political gain or profit, Fox and other extreme right media and national politicians, and how this only makes control and or effective suppression of threat of COVID impossible. Concern for family who are traveling this week. And regarding voter fraud, people choose news designed for entertainment. DIY voter fraud. Steve, what was on your mind this week? I'm not sure which one of those was your response, but
that interdependence one was my thought. Just kind of came together with things I've been reading and thinking about the family, the death. I didn't really know my niece-in-law's father very well. Saw him at their wedding. That's about it, but still, how family members have various ways of supporting each other, and that goes out to friends. And then I thought, well, our community, we're trying to support each other and or should be supporting each other in ways better than we do. Nationally, certainly we got two halves that don't seem to support each other very well. And then you got nations, and oh my gosh, things get complicated.
Dustin, how about you?
No, that's kind of what the survey is kind of tracking. What general conversations when and we talked about this before, when we're not having particular news items shouted into our ear. Most people are still concerned about COVID. And one of the more interesting, my responses to those, or the questions I always want to ask, are more psychological, of like how the people who are now affected by serious infections and deaths in others. So the inescapable part of that. Like, how does that influence? Now, I'm sure some of them just kind of move over to accepting, like who were refusing before and accepting now. I'm sure that happens, but I'm sure there's also a lot of other emotions people aren't talking about with that. Like, what happens when your God dies? That's those kinds of questions. And then it's still also a smaller percentage because we're at 1%. The numbers, and I know I sound callous about this, but like the numbers, the 3.5% of the population is what you need for a revolution. That's the number that's just seared into my brain. What are the psychological things that happen in family units when they're confronted in this particular way, like with COVID deaths? What are all the different things? And are there conversations about that? Because that's what I feel people, they're grasping with how to actually feel like a human. And they're also grasping with the whole, everyone, we're all each other's enemies, So the internal and external grasping of COVID now, because we've moved into something different. So are people talking about how they deal with things in your circles?
Well, I think to a certain extent it's more kind of the sense I get is kind of throwing up their hands saying, why can't we get people to see things properly? Why can't other people see the truth the same way I see it? And that's really the issue for me. I have a next door neighbor who is not vaccinated. He's also the guy who flies the black flag on his Stars and Stripes dyed black on his front porch. And I've thought about, what can I say to him? Because what I really want to say to him is, you've been my neighbor for a long time. I like you. I care about you. I don't want you to die. I don't want you to get sick, and I don't want you to spread this thing to your grandchildren. What's keeping you from getting vaccinated? What's the issue? But I don't know how to approach that in a way that he doesn't translate as political. Like, here's another liberal trying to tell me what to do. So I just stay quiet. Now, should he happen to come down with COVID, I'm going to feel a load of guilt on that, because maybe if I said something in the right way to him now, I might persuade him to get vaccinated. But I don't trust that I have the right strategy for doing that. And I certainly don't, I don't want to create a conflict and get into, make things worse. I try to be tolerant of people who don't agree with me, and not necessarily try to change the way they think. You think I have a lot of folks who don't agree with me about a lot of things. But
well, I would imagine, if you just approach with love, that's usually comes across. Steve, you were saying you had do you know people who were on the, not anyway, I want to say anti-vaxxer, but that's a whole range of people who are now affected in, because you were mentioning people who had passed. Did you come across any of those situations?
No, I haven't. Other than, seeing it on the news, I haven't personally talked to anybody who's opposed to vaccines. My wife and I have a house cleaner comes in every 2 weeks, and with the Delta variant coming up, she had COVID, our house cleaner, but we didn't know whether she had been vaccinated after having COVID, and we had been seeing her for a few months now when none of us wore masks because she had COVID. We'd been vaccinated, so we all thought that was safe. But then we started hearing about the Delta variant. My wife got worried. So when our house cleaner showed up, my wife had her mask on again and said, I'm a little worried because of the Delta variant. And our house cleaner said, oh, I've been vaccinated. So we didn't really have to go too far in the conversation.
Yeah. Are we hearing honest news reports like that where like we're close to 70% vaccination? And like when I say honest news of like admitting that this is going to be like a flu thing because it travels around the world and there's summertime in the other hemisphere and travel, that kind of stuff. And like, here's how we live with a 70% vaccinated population. Is that being talked about in an honest way?
Yeah, I don't think we've heard enough about that, because I think you're right. If you think long term, probably COVID vaccine is going to become more like a flu shot. It's going to be something. It's part of our future because of variants. Just like the flu shot has to be redone every year. It's because of the variants that come out every year in different parts of the world and eventually spread to us. But let me go back to Michael's question about talking to the neighbor, if I could, because I wonder if he has a trusted news source that might now be talking about how many people who are hospitalized and who are dying are unvaccinated, because the logic seems inescapable that if only unvaccinated, well, not only, but let's 90% unvaccinated people going to the hospital, it's about 90% are unvaccinated, but of those dying, it's like 99.7% people who are dying are unvaccinated. So those facts seem to show that the vaccine is safe. Also, there's no news about vaccine side effects showing up. That's some horrible things. Millions of people have gotten it. You would think if there were a trend that it was hurting people, we would have heard about it. There would have been reports on it. So if your neighbor has ability to work through that rationally, I wonder if you could talk to him about what his trusted news sources are and whether they're talking about the same things that your news sources are.
Yeah, we have not had a lot of conversations about news sources, and really I after an initial kind of assessment of him when he moved in about what side of things he's on,
Yeah.
and seeing his response to things, I avoid the issue. I don't want to, like I say, he lives next door. I don't want to dodge somebody every time I walk out the door.
Sure.
Sure. About that. And we want to be friendly to him. I share tomatoes out of the garden with them. We take care of things for them. So we do care about them. But I don't know how to begin that conversation. All I can do is make a remark about what I'm doing, that I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned about this resurgence, because I think there are going to be even people who have gotten the vaccine, who are going to become complacent in dealing with the fact that they could be picking up the virus. You don't necessarily have to be symptomatic, but you could pick up the Delta variant and pass it on. I could pass it on to my grandchildren who haven't been vaccinated. I'm really worried about that. So I wear a mask wherever I go. I pass somebody in the street, I put a mask on. And I tease about it. I say it's because I don't want to be mistaken for a Republican, but it's really, I'm concerned that, this thing, could resurge. I mean, it's almost like we had an earthquake. Now the tidal wave is coming. We had a very bad experience, but as we go into the fall and into the winter, if not only the Delta variant, but the next one in line comes along, are people going to respond to it? There's fatigue. I don't want it anymore. I don't want to be restricted anymore. I don't want to wear a mask anymore. Well, too bad. I don't want to be, growing old, but I am. So you gotta face reality here. So,
you think maybe we'll all demand to take the politics out of it? The more people who get affected for longer?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. That's an interesting question because, as I said, someone mentioned that even if Donald Trump came out very strongly for the vaccine and so forth, that it wouldn't change minds. There seemed to be a group of people who Trump was exploiting, but not creating. They were there waiting for someone to start saying the things they wanted to hear. And so there is a whole group of anti-vaxxers who didn't want to take flu shots or measles shots or other things. So those folks are already there, and they're not going to change. And then other people, I don't know whether it's political or not. I think sometimes people want to be on a team, even if they don't understand what's my team's position. And it's becoming a little unclear now what the MAGA team's stance is with regard to vaccine. So I don't know. I don't know if the politics can be taken out of it. I think it's something runs deeper. I've always said with these folks, I think it's a resentment that they're not conservative, they're reactionary. And in my experience with some people, if I say I think one way, they're going to say the other. Doesn't matter. They don't have to know anything about it. All they have to know is that I feel the way I do, and they're against it. So I'm serious. I think there's a lot of truth about that. If they hear, if they listen to Rachel Maddow say something, they're going to disagree. Doesn't matter. She could be telling them that they're the most wonderful person on earth, and they're not going to believe what she's saying. So. It's interesting that COVID is dominating it, but there are some other things going on. I wonder if anybody's paying attention to what's going on politically in Washington. There were no responses, absolutely no mention of the fact that Joe Biden says this is the greatest threat to democracy since the Civil War. And nobody's talking about it. Some people are talking about it, but it's news junkies like me, and it's not,
What was the greatest threat? Just COVID in general?
No. Voter suppression.
Oh, voter suppression.
Yeah, and these voter suppression laws, and he's kind of maneuvering around the filibuster and whether they should eliminate the filibuster, and there's all this stuff's going on that's really going to make a big difference, but it doesn't get public attention. Was that your experience, Steve? I didn't see anybody in your list mention anything about that. None of the people I talked to mentioned it as a top story.
No, they haven't. Although one of my friends, the guy lives in Winchester, it's close enough to the Washington, D.C. area. The Washington Post is their local newspaper. So he didn't list it as one of his top two, but he was talking about the same thing that you're mentioning. That seems like maybe in the Washington, D.C. area, people think about it more, but the rest of the country doesn't seem to place that much importance on some of these inside the Beltway battles that are taking place.
Dustin, is this something you personally have paid attention to this week?
No. There's some interesting things. Most people in my circle probably would agree with, if it's coming from that area, from a politician or a smaller source, none of that will make a difference. Like, we'll just see that same politics. But they do pay attention to more groundswell things. but that's how they view the news. So like some people, there's definite people who, you know, will talk. I don't know what I'm trying to say. We don't believe Biden. I'm glad to hear it though. Like it's this idea of like, if he's talking about the filibuster, there's a bit of hope that says, oh, well, maybe we'll deal with this thing. But then the other voice says, no, I've seen this theater before. And the same thing every time I've seen this theater before. And without from my personal point of view, without a significant social backing, I don't see it. That's the only theater that's worked that I've seen if it had social backing. If it doesn't, you know, all right. When we start seeing those responses in the survey, that's what I mean by social backing.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that struck me in this last election cycle, because I was a Bernie Sanders supporter, I listened to Bernie when he would give speeches, and in truth, only had to listen once because he gave the same speech over and over and over again. And at the time, I thought, well, you know, people are going to get tired of hearing that. But what actually happened was his ideas have become part of the general conversation. He has really shifted the conversation, talking about taxation, talking about the environment, talking about education and free college and those kinds of things. So the idea of repeating the idea something over and over and over again, that's the strategy the Republicans have had for a long time. I mean, they beat the abortion issue. They beat that drum all the time. They're still beating it now. There's a lawsuit now asking Roe v. Wade be overthrown, coming out of Arkansas, I think. But this idea that if you want to get through to people, you have to be boring to the point of saying the same thing over and over again. And that's the long game. And that's what Mitch McConnell is very adept at, is setting your sights on something and sticking with it, going after it, year after year. So now, he's got the Supreme Court, he's got most of the mid-level judicial posts in the country. He's got his taxation policy done. He didn't do these overnight. So I'm wondering, does the left have the same strategy? Can we?
The left has a strategy?
Yeah. Well, can we be patient and say, this is what we're going to go for, and we're going to be relentless in doing it, instead of coming up with slogans like defund the police, which is complete distraction. And I'm not sure if anybody knows what it means, but the folks on the left seem to be a lot less patient and persistent than folks on the right. And I'm wondering, is that always going to remain true, or can we develop a cadre of people who are going to keep pushing for environmental change in environmental policy, change in taxation policy, freedom of choice? Or you go through the litany, but you have to stay on them. You can't just have this week's news story and then forget about it next week. Make sense, Dustin? Or
Oh, absolutely. Mr. Bernie Sanders is the embodiment of Mr. Overton window. And that is great. So I noticed people talking about it. And for my money, the things that's missing is for common people to be able to do something, with some sort of gain, and it could be micro, but so we went from, I don't know exactly what I want, but you're not giving it to me, to I know what I want and you're not giving it to me. That's what the population went through, at least the left population. Mm-hmm. And without a reinforcement of that, we won't be engaged. We won't, I need to be able to practice this. I can't wait for somebody in Congress to do it for me, because that just puts me, whether it works or not, puts me in the old school electoral conversation, and we're tired of it.
Well, is that what I was describing as the impatience on the left? Are you expressing that are you?
Sure. And since we're dealing, if we're bypassing the old dynamic, and the goal is not to get rich and dominate everyone and enforce our will. If we want to actually do these social things and work as a society, it operates on a different level, and it has to be a natural thing. It has to be as natural as commerce. Think of it that way. Just watching what the kids do these days, I guess. And so it's slower. It's not impatient. It's slow.
Well, I mean, the old expression, are you willing to plant the tree whose shade you'll never feel? Are you willing?
I like that.
Are you willing to do something, the benefit of which will not manifest itself for you personally, but will further down the line? That's kind of how I feel about environmental issues, is that no matter what happens, the earth is in for some real shockers in the next 10 years, and nobody can do anything about it. The die is already cast on that. But there are some things that we could do that might preserve things for grandchildren, great grandchildren down the line. And that's tends to be, I guess, when you reach my age, that's what you start thinking about more, because, I'm not going to see the effects of a 30-year plan. That's not going to make any difference for me. Steve, am I?
I agree with that. Yeah, I have to think of the grandchildren, and what it's going to be like 70 years from now for them.
Yeah.
No, this is a common theme I'm feeling of. There's a need for a belief. There's a spiritual bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need a new religion, to put it simply, and a new spirituality, something like that. And that's why I keep coming back to, what is the moral context of things? I think people people want things to believe.
Mm-hmm.
It's a human nature. And we're kind of yearning for this thing, and we're yearning for some moral answers too. I thought of a third question for the survey, which was just in my head here, of what would you tell the world about the things that you've witnessed or thought about this week?
Yeah,
and I call that a moral question, because when I'm thinking about it, is if I could have a moment with the world to say something honest, and to get back down to that simplicity, that a strong emotional, moral connection to a belief to carry me through the things that are even worse and worse and worse and worse, it seems like. Sorry, I soapbox there for a minute.
Well, I don't know that you want to kind of phrase that question in a way that makes it easy for people to answer. I think the other two questions, are pretty straightforward. And when you ask somebody, what would you tell the world? It kind of puts them on a spot, and they're going to want to sound profound instead of just.
Well, I'll keep that one for myself then.
Well, no, I think it's a good question. Something that that we might explore further, but I think you have to be careful how you ask that question to elicit the kind of response that you want. But no, I like it. I've thought about some other changes in questions, such as, if you were the director of the news program, what are your top stories? I did, by the way, I did in the video last week, I listed what the at least my major news sources were, and I put them in the video. And this week, just as a frame of reference, it's not, there's no right or wrong, but as a frame of reference, this week, the PBS NewsHour yesterday, their top stories were COVID and the Olympics, a Hong Kong crackdown, particularly with regard to the children's book that came out about the sheep and the wolves and so forth, the January 6th investigation, and the politics of the COVID vaccine. This week, this morning, they talked about the insurrection fallout, meaning, how people are viewing that, particularly with the new commission that Pelosi's setting up. They talked about gun violence, and they talked about the COVID surge. on Face the Nation, it was the COVID surge, vaccination, the mask mandate, the economic effect of the Delta variant, and there was a new book called Only I Can Fix It, which is about the early days of the Trump administration. And then finally, the New York Times was Corona, the Olympics, fires in Oregon, and Biden creating a new antitrust team. I thought you might find that interesting, Dustin. It's the first time I've heard the term antitrust in the news in my lifetime, I think.
I like it. I like it.
So anyway, there's a recurrence here, but what I find interesting there is they're covering different stories too. And because I guess I should probably start viewing One America and Fox News and other sources to get them. But I'd like to, for our future, I'd like for you to kind of pay attention to what people are talking about, maybe what Crystal Ball is focusing on this week on her podcast or whatever. So anyway, that's I think it's important to be aware of what you're hearing and what you're seeing. It's just like I said this before, just like in your diet, you have to pay attention to what you're eating. I think you have to pay attention to what you're watching and what you're listening to. And, I try to force myself to watch Fox News. It's fairly easy in the daytime. It's impossible for me to watch Tucker Carlson. I just can't watch the guy. He brings out the demon in me.
I keep thinking about how do we, I started asking how does the news, but I'm interested in how do we find out what people want to hear? Like, are we ever asked that? Not here's the news. What do you think? It's what do you want to hear about? And the only thing you come up with was Google Analytics, but that's an interesting question. Does anyone ever ask?
Do they ask me what I want to hear?
Yeah.
I'm talking about what subjects I want them to cover or what
Anything, yeah.
What opinions I want to hear.
Anything.
No.
We don't have that input, do we?
No.
Nope.
How do they know?
Well, they do focus groups is what they do. I mean, they'll put stories out and they'll have people respond to them, live, click a button as your interest rises or wanes. So no, I think it's a fascinating issue, and I don't know if we'll ever hear anyone talk about it because all the people that we could count on to tell us have a vested interest in what they're doing. I mean, how do you expect a news organization to be critical of itself?
Public shaming. That's why I watch internet news.
Well, I am interested in that because I don't see enough internet.
Well, this is so interesting is the network news, what do they call it? Legacy news, was not used to public participation.
Right.
And once the public started participating, well, especially the anonymous public, we can be assholes. They didn't like any of this stuff.
Right.
And now you have a new generation of people bred in constant public comment.
Mm-hmm.
So you used to have a newsroom that was closed, and now you have a newsroom that's hypersensitive to immediate reactions. Where we get the downside we're working through now, like on leftist sphere, I am seeing more stories that are more clickable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually about the infighting amongst the left. That seems to be the drama. Like we all, no matter what anyone says, we all love soap operas in whatever form.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've talked about the difference between the traditional news sources and internet news sources. And one of the reasons why I continue to watch the major networks and read the New York Times and so forth is that I know that on the internet, if I click a story, I'm going to get 10 more stories like that. I'm being filtered. The algorithm that they're using in whatever search engine, as soon as I express an interest in something, I get bombarded with things related to that. So I don't want to be filtered. I want a certain, I'll call serendipity to it, that I want to come across a story that I haven't sought out. That's important to me. To tell me what's going on. I listen to BBC whenever I can. They do a broadcast every morning on NPR, or at least on our local NPR station, and they're talking about entirely different things. Occasionally a story about something in America, but they're talking about things all over the world. So personally, I don't want to be programmed. I don't want to hear what I want to hear. I want to hear what somebody thinks I ought to hear, and try to find among those things something that might be useful to me, or something that I feel is worthy of further exploration. So I'd be interested in hearing the kind of the headlines of internet stories this week. Point me at things that you think are critical. We've all got our own filter.
Well, let's see here. My top 8 stories as I open YouTube. There's some infighting between Jimmy Dore and Sam's and TYT. There's a Dune release, and Nancy Pelosi is corrupt.
Well, the first 2 have got me, buddy. I have no idea what you're talking about. Nancy Pelosi is corrupt.
Some story about how she makes money. That was the other stories that keep coming around. I love the and then they cashed out early on the stock market, and we're like, whatever.